Hello everyone, welcome to Code and Learn. So in the last video, we created all the handlers for our router. But if you remember, we were just working with the interface for the news store. Now in this video, we are going to implement a in-memory store which satisfies this interface so that we can use them in the handlers. Once we get that running, we will test our API end-to-end, and in the following video, we will start adding Postgres to actually preserve the news that we create, because in-memory store will be wiped out when we stop the server and start a new instance of the server. So let's get started with the in-memory store. In internal, I will just create a package called store. Let me close this. Inside store, we will create a file store.go package store. Let us define the store. So it will be of type struct. I will just call it store. Since the store is in memory, we need to have some kind of a locking mechanism, because every request that our HTTP server gets is served in a Go routine. So we need to make it concurrency safe. So first thing that we will have is L, which is of type sync.mutex. Then we need to define the news slice. This will hold all the news in the store. We need to define news because on the store side, we need to define a model for the store itself. The model that we will have in store will represent the news record in the store. So we can say models.go package store, and let's define the news model. Type news struct ID, which will be of type UUID. So I can say UUID, then the author, which is of type string, title, again a string, summary, string, created at time.time, content, again a string, source will be of type url.url, and tags, which will be a slice of strings. So for now, I've just added the field created at as a timestamp when the news is created. When we move to the real database, that is Postgres, we will add two more fields, that is updated at and deleted at. But since this is just for demonstration purposes, I'm not doing it right now. With our model defined, let us go back to the store. The first method that we need to create on the store is create news. So we can say func s store create accepts a news of type news and returns the created news or a error. First thing we will do is acquire the lock, then defer and unlock it. Now news ID should be provided by the database because we don't want users to provide IDs. So we can just say uuid.new. Now we just need to append the news to the existing array. So we can say s.n news and then return the news and nil. So that's it for the create method. Before I proceed with the next methods, let us first create a constructor function to initialize a store. So I can say func new returns a pointer to store. Inside it, I can just say store and initialize the new slice to a new empty slice. If you notice, I haven't initialized sync.mutex because you don't need to initialize it, but for being explicit, let us do that. So that's it for the store constructor method. Now let's implement the find all method. Func store find all returns a slice of news or an error if nothing is found, or if there's an error with the DB operation. First thing we do, acquire the lock and then defer unlock it, return new store in memory and a nil error. Next up is find by ID. Let us do that. Store find by ID, accept the ID which is of type UUID. If found, we return the news or error otherwise. As with all the functions, acquire the lock, defer unlock it, read through our slice, that is the slice we have in memory, compare the ID. If ID matches, we return the news object and a nil error. Otherwise, we return empty news and an error which says news not found. Next, let us add the method delete by ID. Delete by ID. Again, ID is of type UUID. If there's a failure in the delete operation, we return an error. Otherwise, we just say null. Acquire the lock, defer unlock it. In here, first what we need to do is iterate over the slice to find the news that we want to delete. Actually, we want to find the index of the news that we want to delete. So I'm just creating an inline function which will take in the ID of type UUID and return the index for it. Inside it, like we did earlier, we just ran through the news stored in our in-memory store. If n.id is equal to ID that we have, we return the index. Otherwise, we will return -1 to indicate that ID wasn't found. In here, we need to pass in the ID. This actually need to go here. Outside, we just check if index is equal to -1. We return error saying news not found. But if we found the news, we can just remove it from our slice. So n.news is equal to append everything before the index that we want to delete and everything after the index that we want to delete. So we can say idx +1 up to the end and then use a spread operator. In the end, we just return nil. So that's it for the delete by ID method. Now let's write update by ID or update by ID, accept the news object, and if we fail, we return an error. First thing, acquire the lock, defer unlock it, or idxn is equal to, that is same thing, searching for the news in our in-memory store or in-memory slice. If we find it, that is n.id is equal to news.id, need to correct it here, id, we replace it s.n.news, idx is equal to the passed in news, and return from here saying return nil. If not found, that is outside the for range loop, we return error not found. So with all these methods, we should satisfy the interface defined here. But one thing you will notice is we are accepting news post request body, but in our store, we are accepting news model that is defined inside the store. So we need to update our interface. So we can say store.news, store.news. So wherever we have news post request body in this interface, we need to replace it with the store news model. That's it. But you will notice that this is throwing error because we are actually using the news post request body. So in our model here, where we have validated, what we can do is return the news object once we have validated that everything is working. In here, we will use the news model. So I will change this to say if errors not is equal to nil, return news and errors. But otherwise, we will create a new store news object and then populate the values, returning nil for error. As you can see, the types don't match. What we can do here is add ID for when we acquire the ID and say UUID JSON ID. That should fix the ID error. For the created and source, we need to actually use this. For this, we can say T, and if everything works out, we can here update created at to T. Similar for source, we can do URL. If error is not equal to nil, we append it. Otherwise, we will just use it here. So now we update the handlers to do the same. So I can say n error. If error not is equal to nil, we do n here. Similar to that, for get all news, we need to update it to store.news. For that, we also need to add the same JSON ID, author, summary, created, add, content, source, and finally tags. Back to our handler. Again, we say n. If error not is equal to nil, we append it. Otherwise, we pass the news model. Delete doesn't accept the news model, so we are fine with it. Now here, we just need to say underscore that we are ignoring the news response. In here, the mock store needs to update its methods to accept store news, store.news. That should make it work. Just to make sure that everything is working, let us run all our tests. Go test. Okay, so tests are passing. Now we just need to update here to stay store.new. So that means in our server, we are now using the in-memory store. Let us now run it. And in a different tab for the terminal, let us try to make a request to one of the endpoint. So first, let us try to create news. For that, we will just use a post request to this endpoint. Let's remove the verbose flag from curl and also add text to the request body. Otherwise, our validation fails. Here I can say test and then make the request. So we don't see any errors. That means we can now make the get all request and see the news are finally being returned. So now you can also test all the other endpoints to see if we are able to fetch or perform the management of news using various endpoints. Just to recap, in this lesson we created an in-memory store that holds the news slice and then perform different operations on that slice based on the method you are calling on the store. This store implementation implements this interface that we defined in the handlers. That means our handlers can now work with the in-memory store. So that's it for this lesson. So in the next lesson, we are actually going to use Postgres to preserve our news store, because if I shut the server down and then start it again, make the request to get all news, you will see we return an empty slice. That is because we are implemented an in-memory store. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. If you have any questions, please post a comment under the video or reach out to our Discord server. Until next time, happy coding.